So today I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about due diligence. I've actually been having a lot of questions at our open houses from potential buyers who do have questions about due diligence here in North Carolina, how it works and what exactly does that mean in the contract. So let's take a few minutes, talk about due diligence and explore all those details. If we haven't met yet, my name is Sue Singleton. I'm a realtor with Carolina Coast Homes Real Estate here in beautiful southeastern North Carolina. And I want to thank you for joining me today. So let's get to it. What is the due diligence period in North Carolina? So in North Carolina, our contracts do allow us to put into the contract the period for which the buyer does have an opportunity to perform all their inspections. Now, we may put in the contract 14 days, we may put in the contract 21 days, we could put, 15 days. It is very specific to each individual buyer and their agent as to what period of time goes into that contract and what period of time the seller will agree to for that due diligence period. Typically, I usually do see days in contracts generally run from 14 to 21 days. So during the due diligence period, the buyer has the opportunity to have all of their inspections done. They may have a home inspection done, an HVAC system done, a termite home inspection done, those type of inspections done. And it is important to note that even after the due diligence period ends, the buyer still can continue to have inspections done, or they could have a survey done. All of those things would fall outside of the due diligence period, though. So we'll say, for example, if they wanted to have a survey done and the due diligence period was for 14 days, they couldn't get the survey done until day number 26 of the contract, maybe that's like 4 days before closing, they still could have the survey done. It just would not fall under the due diligence period. So what does that mean as far as what the buyer needs to pay to the seller? So North Carolina contracts do offer on the contract an option for a buyer to pay to seller funds for due diligence, for that due diligence period. It's not required in the state of North Carolina that due diligence or earnest money be paid for the contract to be binding, but it is an act of good faith on the behalf of a buyer to show the seller that they are serious about the offer that they're making. So let's just say that you're looking at buying this property, you've decided I want to pay the seller $1,000 to be able to do my inspections during the due diligence period, to put the property under a pending status, and that's going to allow me to have my inspectors come in and look at the property. So I'm going to pay that seller $1,000. So important about that $1,000 payment to the seller, it goes directly to the seller, it's paid directly to the seller, and in most instances, it is non-refundable. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't get credit for it at closing, because you do, but if you decide to cancel the contract, then for the most part, there are some limited circumstances that due diligence fee being paid to the seller is going to stay with the seller, and you're not going to get a refund of that money. It's a little different than earnest money. Let's say you pay $1,000 in earnest money that goes to the escrow agent. You cancel during the due diligence period, then odds are you're going to get that earnest money deposit back. That's all handled through the escrow agent. Again, we don't handle the money. The escrow agent is handling the earnest money deposit. Carolina Coast Homes Real Estate does not hold earnest money for any buyer. It all has to go through the escrow agent. There are some agencies that will hold the money for their clients. However, Carolina Coast Homes Real Estate does not hold earnest money. That is all done through the escrow agent, which generally is the perhaps a closing attorney, or it could be another attorney, or whoever the buyer and seller would agree to be the escrow agent for them under that contract. So earnest money is a little bit different. So, it's important to remember that about the due diligence period, because some people come in and they'll say, oh, I'm a buyer, I cancel during the due diligence period, I can get my due diligence payment back that I made to the seller. And in most cases, that is not the case. That money does stay with the seller. Now, there have been times, and it's probably been at least 3 years or so, maybe a little bit longer than that. There, you can get, if a seller and a buyer both agree to it, you can get an addendum prepared by a attorney, which can reference that due diligence period and how that due diligence period is going to work and under what circumstances would the due diligence be returned to the seller. However, that is a special addendum that does have to be prepared by an attorney. It is not part of our contract. So that is something that you would have to talk to an attorney about getting that particular type of addendum prepared and to understand all the legalities that come along with those type of addendums. And I have seen that happen a few times with the due diligence period. Most of the time those were on really big fixer-uppers where perhaps the seller, wanted to, the seller wanted some assurance that the buyer just wasn't going to back out of the contract. But what they did come to terms on during the due diligence period, when the seller would agree to refund that due diligence money back to the seller. Again, remember that is an addendum to the offer to purchase contract that does have to be prepared by an attorney. That is not something that us as real estate agents can prepare. That has to be an additional addendum prepared by an attorney. Maybe that'll change in the future. If we get different forms that we can use for that, maybe that'll be addressed in the future. I don't know. There's been a little bit of talk about that, but currently, as of the recording of this video in 2025, there is no addendum that a real estate agent can attach to an offer to purchase contract regarding what the specifics are about the return of any due diligence money that does have to go to an attorney. I know I've said that like 3 times, but that's really, really important to remember because there are some states that do allow due diligence money to be returned to the buyer. And they do have set out in their contracts what that due diligence period looks like. However, if you decide to go forward with the contract, then you do get credit for that due diligence money that you did pay to the seller. That is a credit to you on the closing statement at closing. So that is all taken care of. So the due diligence period and how does a buyer terminate? So we'd have a termination of the contract that a buyer would sign, that if they're terminating during the due diligence period, there's a block that they mark that says they're canceling the contract or they're terminating the contract in accordance with their right to do so under their due diligence period. They're waiving basically their ability to receive the due diligence funds back. They're just canceling because of that. Maybe they have cold feet and they just changed their minds and they don't want to buy the property anymore. They don't want to buy any property anymore. They're going to keep their current property. Then that just gives them a way that they can do that. Remember, in North Carolina, during that due diligence period, according to our contracts, as long as you're canceling, I can't even say that word right today, canceling the contract during the due diligence period, you don't have to give a reason. All you have to do is say that you're canceling it during the due diligence period. So, keep that in mind. If it's after the due diligence date, there are some other reasons that you can mark on there why you are canceling the contract. Just remember, after the due diligence period ends, if you decide to cancel the contract, you very well are forfeiting your earnest money deposit as well that is paid to the escrow agent, especially if it is of no fault of the seller as to why you are canceling the contract. So keep that in mind. If it's after the due diligence period, you very well may never receive that earnest money deposit back. So you need to make sure that you are clear with your agent the consequences of canceling after the due diligence period and the how the due diligence period works and canceling before the termination of the due diligence period. So, and remember that cancellation, you may sign that cancellation at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on on the last day of the termination of the due diligence period or the end of the due diligence period, but it still has to be delivered to the agent for the seller. So you need to make sure you're having these conversations with your agent to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that the seller has been notified that you are canceling, because you don't want to not inform the seller side. You may have talked to your buyer's agent, but you want to make sure everybody understands that you are canceling, so that there's not any going over into the after that time frame for the due diligence date. So that's really important to remember. Generally can be really confusing, because due diligence is one of those things that a lot of buyers don't like. They don't like that. They like having the opportunity in the contract, that period of time, to actually have all of their inspections done and to be able to terminate the contract should they decide to do so. But again, it is sometimes a seller looking at a property. If no due diligence money is being paid to a seller, then that seller may be a little hesitant about actually pinning that property, putting it under contract, and then the buyer walking away from it, and they don't have anything invested in that time frame that the seller had the property taken off the market. So it is a very unique situation to understand regarding due diligence, the due diligence time frame, the due diligence period, what happens if you cancel during the due diligence period, and what happens after you cancel after the due diligence period, and whether you want to put money to the seller for due diligence. So it's really important. Our North Carolina Real Estate Commission provides some really good materials regarding due diligence and how that works, and also on earnest money. And that information you can pull free from the website under publications as well, or ask your buyer's agent for that information so that you're clear about how due diligence works. And they give some examples on how that does work. And so that's really important to remember. That's one of the things I find that a lot of buyers get confused on. It's something that sellers get confused on too, because sellers sometimes will think, okay, we've got the property under contract. They've paid me $1,000 in due diligence money. Woohoo! Everything's good. We're good to close. And that may not necessarily be the case either, because that buyer still does have that opportunity during that due diligence period to cancel that contract, to terminate that contract. So these conversations are very important, whether you're a buyer or whether you are a seller, that you're having these conversations about due diligence with your agent. So if your agent isn't bringing it up to you, please make sure that you're bringing it up with your agent so that you're fully aware of exactly what that means. Okay. So I just wanted to bring this information to you today, because I have had several questions about due diligence over the last 3 or 4 weeks at open houses, and I just wanted to put it out there so that there would be a resource that I could give you, so that you might find some answers to your questions here as well. All righty. Well, I hope that you have a good rest of your day. Thank you for joining me, and I will talk to you again real soon. Take care.